Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Russia threatens nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles use if Finland and Sweden join NATO. U.S. President Joe Biden says his administration will decide soon whether to send a senior official to Kyiv. And it's a triumph of love over war as a Russian marries a Ukrainian at the U.S.-Mexico border. We'll begin with news that Russia has warned that if Sweden and Finland join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, Russia would deploy nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles in an enclave in the heart of Europe. Both Finland, which shares an 810-mile border with Russia, and Sweden are now considering joining the US-led military alliance. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, said that should Sweden and Finland join NATO, then Russia would have to strengthen its land, naval and air forces in the Baltic Sea, where Russia has its Kaliningrad enclave sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania. Mr. Medvedev also said he hoped Finland and Sweden would see sense, or they'd have to leave with nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles close to home. There could be no more talk of a nuclear-free Baltic region, according to him. One town on Finland's border with Russia is Imatra, home to 26,000 people, casting a nervous eye towards their eastern neighbor. It used to welcome Russian tourists, but since Moscow launched what it called a special military operation in Ukraine, Imatra fears receiving less benign arrivals. That worry has prompted Finland to consider joining NATO, which would be a major pivot in its security arrangements. In the meantime, NATO is expected to introduce a fast-track mechanism for admitting Finland and Sweden as members, so says Associate Professor, School of Politics and International Relations at the East China Normal University, Zhang Zhen. Russia sees NATO expansion as a red line that threatens its security and has warned Finland and neighbor Sweden not to join the alliance.
Recent military conflicts in Ukraine really revived NATO as a military alliance. It has lost some of its organizational salience in the post-Cold War period, as Macron correctly pointed out a few years ago. But the military operation we see in Ukraine now really changed that strategic calculation and threat perception by countries outside of NATO, like Finland and Sweden. If the two countries do decide to apply for NATO membership, there might be some fast-track mechanism that NATO may be willing to introduce in order to accommodate the two countries as soon as possible, maybe even as early as early summer this year. There's the divided opinion both within Finland and Sweden, but as well as within NATO for right now. But the quick fast-track accommodation of Finland and Sweden's application is also highly likely, highly possible.
Associate Professor, School of Politics and International Relations, East China University, Zhang Zhen. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says the expansion of NATO would only promote stability in Europe. He was responding to a question of whether the United States would be concerned that Russia could escalate the confrontation over Ukraine if Sweden and Finland joined the alliance.
We would not be concerned that the expansion of a defensive alliance would do anything other than promote stability on the European continent. Now, of course, any aspirant countries would have to meet the criteria that's spelled out in NATO's charter, would have to receive consent from the alliance itself. But again, NATO is a defensive alliance that is there to defend and to fortify and NATO would not be a threat to anyone who is not attacking NATO. So Putin is facing a strategic defeat on the military front, on the economic front, as we've just talked about. Politically, President Putin is a pariah. His country is isolated diplomatically. You can measure that in terms of the votes we've seen at the UN, of the condemnation that is raining down on Russia from all corners of the globe. The Russian Federation knows where we stand in terms of our commitment to Article 5, the sacrosanct commitment we have that an attack on one is an attack on all. But when it comes to the ICC, we know that the ICC is one potential venue for accountability. We have cooperated with the ICC in the past. I believe
And away from that, at least temporarily, Ukrainian volunteers distributed food to locals living in Severodonetsk, a town in eastern Ukraine, close to the front line as shelling was heard in the distance. The Ukrainian volunteers distributed food just under Russian attacks, especially since Moscow launched an assault on Ukraine on February the 24th. The town lies at the northernmost end of Ukraine's 700-kilometer line of contact, the ceasefire line that Ukrainian forces have held against Russian-backed separatist forces in Donbass since 2015. The Ukrainian forces and vehicles were seen on the town's deserted streets around 12 kilometers away from the front line. Bodies wrapped in blankets and sheets were laying down on the floor of the local hospital morgue. But the head of the hospital, Roman Vodyanik, said they have enough medicines to treat patients, but face shortages for those who are hiding in shelters and basements.
Tomorrow marks 50 days since Russia invaded Ukraine. In that time, 4.6 million refugees have left the country.
Military reservists from Ukraine's territorial defense forces searched for landmines and live ammunition in the village of Novyebek as they cleared mortar rounds scattered across the area east of Kiev. Russian soldiers entered the village on February the 27th as they advanced onto the capital. But locals there said the village was used as a base for tanks and artillery until it was recaptured by the Ukrainian army. Let's talk now to Ambassador Ogbole Amadu Ode. Ambassador Amadu Ode is a retired diplomat, and he joins us virtually. Your Excellency, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
This situation seems to be escalating. As we've just been reporting, Sweden and Finland are considering joining NATO as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, seemingly over the same matter. And Russia, in its response, has said that if they do so, then there will be problems, if one is to put it mildly. Are these wise moves by everybody concerned, Russia, NATO, Finland, and Sweden?
Yeah, I think in talking about the Ukrainian war, or popularly known, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it is important for us to put all the issues in proper perspective. And in doing so, to go back a little bit in recent contemporary global history. At the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, late 80s, 1991, the US came up with what is called the Defense Policy Guidance, officially known, but unofficially called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which espouses a unipolar world with the United States at the top, the hegemonic power in global affairs. A few years later, but precisely in 2001, there came into being the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with membership encompassing China, Russia, recently India, Pakistan, and a whole lot of the Eurasian countries. For me, that marked the beginning of the new Cold War. What we are seeing now is while the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is expanding westwards, NATO, that was not disbanded after the collapse of the Soviet Union, is expanding.
We do seem to have lost.
Okay,
he's back. Please go on, Ambassador.
Good. To me, therefore, the war in Ukraine is a war of the two blocs, as it were, and bring to being, on the one side, the ideology led by the East, China, Russia, who want a multipolar world, and the United States, which wants to maintain its hegemony by insisting on a unipolar world. So the war in Ukraine is a reflection of the clash of these two ideologies.
But then if that is the case, Ambassador, and now there's a war going on as a result of this clash in Ukraine, that was why I asked the question, is it, shall we say, strategically defensible that Finland and Sweden, who have been previously warned by Russia not to join NATO and not to even consider it, are doing so at a time that there is war in one of their neighbors. And that war, regardless of which side one is on, is leading to loss of lives and destruction of property and infrastructure and all of that, that will take dozens of years at the very least to repair. That's why I asked the question, is it strategically defensible, or should they have maintained critical neutrality until they see which way things are going?
Okay, the way I see it is this: in all situations of military conflict, the fear factor comes in. On the side of Finland and Sweden, they are scared of a possible Russian invasion. On the Russian side, there's also the fear factor of NATO is coming closer and closer to its doorsteps. And therefore, you may consider that the Finns and the Swedes are right in wanting to have some defense protection within the NATO umbrella. And Russia also, strategically thinking, will be saying, okay, if you move in there, you are going to be treated as an enemy. So the fear factor is playing on both sides. How do we balance it to stabilize the situation and move into the level of de-escalation of hostilities is what is left to be seen by all the powers, all the stakeholders involved.
Now, do you agree that the peace talks, coming from what you just said now, do you agree that the peace talks that were initiated by Turkey, and which seemed at one stage to be quite promising, stopped being so when it appeared as if a breakthrough was imminent, but it wasn't in the strategic interests of the parties involved, particularly NATO and Europe, which expressed the wish that they would like to see Russia bled a little bit more and weakened before any negotiations take place, and that because they were backing Ukraine, Ukraine also, in spite of its wish to end this war, couldn't really go to the end and had to say that, the conditions were unfavorable.
Yeah, okay. Now, nobody wants war. That is the take on the surface of the matter, that neither Russia nor Ukraine or the West wants war. But for strategic reasons, could it be therefore that war is being pushed in order to have the war police doctrine in place? And one of it is never to see a superpower, a competing and competitive superpower emerge anywhere in the globe. And therefore, having goaded Russia into war, having goaded Ukraine into war, that the war process continued and to bleed Russia to a sufficient level where negotiations now can take place, and therefore have Russia to concede to certain conditions that will be put on the negotiating table.
Given that scenario, then you talked about the doctrine that talks about a single superpower led. Of course, I mean this is the United States. But since that happened in the late 80s into the 90s, at least two other competitors have emerged on the scene. One is Russia, which is engaged in this crisis. The other is China, and China, for all accounts and from what everybody has said, is even stronger than Russia and is prepared to confront the United States if its interests are threatened, particularly in places like Taiwan or in Hong Kong, and it has also made that clear. So in that kind of situation, is this not a crisis, a bigger one that we are pushing down the road by focusing on Ukraine?
That Ukraine seems to be the scene of a confrontation between Nato and the Eastern Bloc. And don't forget that in that policy guideline, defense policy guideline, what is popularly called now unofficially though, the Wolfowitz Doctrine, it is said, and I quote, that Russia remains the only power in the world with the capability of destroying the US. This is from the official US defense policy. Now, is this a play out? I want to say yes. And in that direction, there may be the imperative to bleed Russia militarily and therefore economically to the extent that she will be forced to go to the negotiating table where concessions can be extracted from her in order to reduce her to a level where she will not account to be a threat militarily to the Western hegemony.
So given that situation, I'm seeing you draw a chess board here. It does appear as if the United States is prepared to use Ukraine as the, shall we say, staging ground to do this bleeding sufficiently to make Russia vulnerable and then be able to extract concessions which might go, in fact, beyond Ukraine, or in some instances have very little to do with Ukraine in the bigger power game that you've talked about under the Wolfowitz Doctrine.
Yeah, but you know that in international relations and in the game of military confrontation, there have always been proxy wars. And proxy wars can come in several guises. There's one going on in Yemen now. The stakeholders may be pulling the string, the puppeteers may be pulling the strings behind. And I see that also playing out in the Ukrainian situation. Ukraine might not want war to the extent of what is massive, leading to a massive destruction of utilities and infrastructure and killing and maiming of people. But right now, she's in a situation where she cannot unilaterally say, no, I don't want any war and let me go on the negotiating table. Attempts have been made, like you say, by Turkey. It looks like there was going to be a breakthrough and suddenly it's chilled out. So it's back to the battlefront. And back to the battlefront means it entails further destruction, further killings and all. And both sides are bleeding until they are sufficiently weak enough and say, okay, now enough of this destruction, enough of these killings, let's go on the negotiating table and talk. And that will be it.
Interesting times ahead indeed. Ambassador Ogbole Amedu Ode, thank you for your time this morning and for your perspective. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you for having me on your program. Good morning.
When we return, Mr. Putin, that's Russia's president, says Russian energy exports should also be diverted to Africa and Latin America. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And we've been talking about Sweden and Finland deciding whether or not they'll be joining the military alliance of NATO. Now, what does Russia think about this? Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov put us out of our misery by commenting on the subject, saying that President Vladimir Putin will consider a range of measures to bolster the country's security if Finland and Sweden join NATO, as soon as the defense ministry presents him with proposals on the subject. Mr. Peskov, in his address to reporters, had said the ministry still needed time to put the proposals together. The comment echoes Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev's statement that Russia would have to bolster its defenses if Sweden and NATO, Finland rather, joined NATO.
There is a current order of our presidents to the Defense Ministry to ready proposals for bolstering our western flank if NATO will continue its military build-up near our western borders. It's an eastern front for NATO. When such a plan of our western frontiers reinforcement will be worked out, the complete range of measures will be considered on a special meeting with the president.
Именно после того, как будет проработан такой.
Let's talk now to Professor of Political Science, former Vice Chancellor of the Adekunle Ajasin University in Akungba Akoko, Professor Femi Mimiko, who joins us virtually from the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife. Good morning, Prof. Nice to see you once again.
Good morning, Ladi. How are you today?
Quite fine. And you?
I'm cool. Nice to see you.
Let me begin by asking what your reaction is to this escalation of this conflict, this issue about some people deciding that two countries, basically, Sweden and Finland, deciding that they would consider joining NATO in spite of the warnings from Russia, and it appears that they're being egged on by the United States and members of NATO itself. Given what's going on in Ukraine as we're speaking, I'll ask the question I asked the diplomat who I spoke to before you. Is this strategically, in your view, a wise move?
Well, good morning again, moderator. Good morning, listeners. My perspective on this is clear. I see this as part of the ongoing diplomatic engagement on the issue of Ukraine. I will be surprised if NATO allows Sweden and Finland to join that military alliance. Why do I say this? The whole Ukraine crisis, Ukraine war, if you will, is an attempt on the part of the Western powers represented by NATO to prevent Russia from projecting power on a global scale. The totality of the activities of NATO in Ukraine, they are directed at containing Russia and making sure it does not project power globally. Moscow has demonstrated now, beyond any reasonable doubt, that it has a will to take action. The reality of invasion of Ukraine and the virtual destruction of that unfortunate country by the Russian military is indicative of a leadership in Moscow that is capable and has demonstrated the determination and the ability to act in a manner that many countries didn't expect that they would be willing to do before. And so with that background, I doubt if NATO will go ahead and encourage both Sweden and Finland to come into NATO in spite of the warnings that the Russians have given. I think we're entering into the era of eyeball to eyeball diplomacy in this regard. But my hunch is that given the fact that we're dealing with a country that has the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, I mean, I'm talking of Russia, I'm sure the Americans and indeed members of NATO are not going to go all out to antagonize such a country. Yes, the diplomatic engagement and conflict may go on. There are some critical points. I'm sure all of these countries will pull back because you don't joke with a country that has the largest arsenal of nuclear bombs. You don't. And so to me, I cannot see Finland and Sweden going all the way to join NATO, in spite of all of the rhetorics that we're hearing as of today.
Let me bring us back to the Ukraine conflict, the one that is currently going on between Russia and Ukraine. Again, one is seeing a situation where a kind of stalemate sort of is building here, and all attempts to bring about some kind of negotiated settlement has failed thus far. If you were to look at it from the prism of the great power politics, my previous guest mentioned the Wolfowitz doctrine, and that's the whole idea that the world has one superpower. But now, since that doctrine and now, two others have emerged and who are willing to put their foot on the ground. One is Russia, which, as you pointed out, invading Ukraine was putting a stamp on the ground. The other is China. So how realistic is it for us not to expect an overturn of what had been known as the current world order ever since the Soviet Union was broken up?
Well, let me start by saying that no world order, no order lasts forever. I mean, that's the basic foundation from which we must take off. And so we should expect that at some point there will be a change in the current world order. Again, my perspective is that we're not going to see that very soon. The world order is not going to change very soon for a number of reasons. Yes, you could argue that American global power has declined considerably in terms of what it is capable of doing or what it's willing to do. We have seen the situation in Afghanistan that made the country to move out of that place after 20 years of a war that you could not even say that it won. There is intense division at home in the United States. So there is evidence of decline. But then the American system is still the dominant power in the global system today. It's not about to lose that very, very pivotal place so soon. Number two, China, which is another emerging superpower, is a beneficiary of the current order. In this system, since 1979, Russia has been able to move about 800 million people out of poverty. It's been able to establish its presence all over the world, practically. With its Road and Belt Initiative, is practically everywhere. I mean, so this system, this order, in a way, pays the Chinese. And so they are not going to be in a hurry to want to replace this order with a different one. For Russia, a lot will depend on what Russia gets out of Ukraine. If Russia desires to occupy the entire territory of Ukraine, that will be a major challenge that I cannot see it delivering upon. But if it's just to demilitarize Ukraine, as it obviously has done, and possibly to hold on to the Donbas region, then we'll be able to talk of a Russia that is also going to continue to play a key role in the system. And mind you, I made a point about the fact that Russia has the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. And so what I'm saying, in essence, is that, yes, we will see that the dominance of the Americans, the unipolar system that came about after the collapse of the Soviet Union, is losing its potency. Qualitative and quantitative reduction in the capacity of the Americans to dominate the system. But then this arrangement is still going to continue forever. And the last point on this is that we should not assume that even if a new system comes up, it's going to be a system that will be beneficial to everybody. The system of dominance and will still continue. Be dominated, and those who are going to dominate those who are going to dominate and those who are going to be dominated. That relationship of dominance will still continue. Yes, the personalities or the names of the states that will be the new dominant powers may change, but you're not going to see a system that is egalitarian. Certainly, it's not going to happen. The international system is not constructed in that manner, and it's not going to change. It's going to be like that for a long time to come. It's driven by power and national interest. And those countries that are able to assemble and deploy the quantum of power that they need to make everybody listen to them are going to be in charge of the system. So even if all that changes, which is not going to happen soon, certainly not because of this war, it does not suggest it's going to be more egalitarian than what you have today.
My final question to you, Prof, on the segment will be about another organization or another system that seems to have fallen into irrelevance, and I know that you have spoken about this before today, and that is the United Nations itself, the system put in place after World War II. That has increasingly been subverted, sometimes by its members and sometimes by others trying to exercise power, as we have just been discussing. This crisis in Ukraine, do you think would probably be one of the final nails in the coffin of the United Nations as a relevant organization in the world system or world order?
My worry with the United Nations system today, as it is that the Secretariat of the United Nations has not done enough in terms of stepping into the picture, in terms of stepping in to find a way of brokering some form of peace, diplomatic engagement between the two warring parties. That, I must say, I'm disappointed that they have not done well enough in that regard. Those nations are the ones that won the Second World War, were the ones that put the United Nations together. And that's what creates the basis for the veto vote. The 5 nations who created the United Nations gave themselves the veto vote. And that's why it's a laughable thing for countries that do not have the power to back up a veto are asking to be given the veto vote. And so the implication of what I'm saying is that the United Nations was set up to save, as its preamble indicates, succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in a lifetime put humanity in such a very terrible state. That situation and that mission will still continue. The global powers that control the global system that run the United Nations are still going to continue to maintain that system in place because it serves their own purpose. It serves their own purpose. The regulatory arrangement they want to put in place through the United Nations continues. Don't never mind the current imbroglio over Ukraine. I'm sure at some point, both of them will step back, the United States and Russia, and find a way to reach accommodation. Because the reality is that the nuclear arsenals that these nations have, they are such that they're not going to go ahead to fight each other. It's not going to happen. Recall that in the 60s, U.S. Secretary of State Nato actually made a point. And this is why it's unfortunate that Ukraine is allowing itself to be this fortunate pawn on the chessboard of these great powers. The Nato actually made the point that it was inconceivable that the American government would use the nuclear bomb except mainland United States of America was attacked. And so at some point, good sense will prevail. These nations will come together. They will continue to use the United Nations because it serves their own purpose. And so the United Nations is not going to go down. It's going to continue to be a tool in the hands of those nations that have enough power to continue to dominate and direct events in the global system.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you once again, Professor Mimiko. Thank you for your time and for your perspective on the program this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the good work you're doing.
Thank you. Russian President Vladimir Putin says that Russian energy exports should be rerouted to Africa and Latin America amidst a push to diversify supplies from the West. He also says that construction of new oil and gas pipelines should be considered from the hydrocarbon fields in West and East Siberia. Mr. Putin suggested meeting fuel demands of domestic consumers, including car owners, transport companies, and agriculture. Let's talk to Ini John McQuarrie, who, as you know, joins me at this time. Ini,
morning, yeah.
The Russian president mentioning Africa and Latin America. So they're already thinking about us.
Yeah, you know, when I first heard you tease the story before I came on, what came to my mind is, where has Africa been since before now? And suddenly we're in the picture. Africa is in the picture. I thought that Africa did not really have that much
to do with it or anything to say to it.
You know, the other day the EU was in Nigeria to talk about gas, you know, how to get the pipelines working and everything. And now Mr. Putin is actually remembering Africa. That's, I mean, there's so many things coming up from the war. That's what we see here.
The finance minister in Russia has written a letter to his Brazilian counterpart asking him for support in the IMF, the World Bank, and G20. Russia is asking for this help to counter the sanctions imposed by the West. Mm-hmm. What do we make of this?
Well, it seems Brazil is friend to Russia and, of course, part of IMF and World Bank. So Russia seems to be asking them to intervene on their behalf. But already the World Bank has stopped its program in Russia because then they are threatening to stop, well, not threatening, but there are talks about suspending their participation, that's Russia, from IMF and from World Bank, their decision-making, their participation and all that. And it's just a talk, and I think the talk got to the ear of Russia. That's why this letter came about. Yes, and if you know if Russia is isolated from World Bank, there are so many things that they will miss. For instance, in 2017, World Bank had 9 programs that it was doing that concerns the development of pipeline, energy, agriculture, fishing, you know, in Russia. And each of those programs, World Bank had a commitment of between $60 million and $160 million. So, I mean, the economy, and they're going to feel it a lot, you know, if they're isolated from the World Bank and IMF. So I believe that is what they're trying to do, to say, well, there are sanctions, but please don't take it this far. I believe that's what this is about.
Talking about feeling it, the United States is feeling the pinch, too, in spite of all the efforts to keep prices down.
Yeah, but you know, the thing about the United States is, you know, that is why it seems so they're the giant of the world or stuff, because they seem to always think of ways out. So President Biden is now talking of having a corn-based petrol fuel, you know, for use, which will be cheaper. You know, remember we talked about the demand for ethanol the other day.
And how that was impacting us.
Yes, so this is part of where it might be going to, because he went to Iowa where they have a major plantation of corn and talked to them about having a corn-based fuel now. Now, of course, that will reduce some of the contents they need from crude to make petrol that they use. But of course, it also has its consequences. It doesn't go that far. But it will save motorists about, I think, about 10 pence at the end of the day for a litre of petrol. And that will go a long way.
Long way, yes. Yeah, especially when you multiply it by the usage.
Exactly, exactly.
It does seem as if Mr. Abramovich, who was last in the news a while ago, is still in the news. Assets, more and more of his assets, including those that he tried to put off to other people.
Yeah, what we call the secondary sanctions now. Right. So even though he has the holdings and he has individuals and corporations who are holding his assets, well, investigation has gotten to them, and it's in the Jersey now. That's between France and the UK. You know, they are the ones that are doing this sanction or this freezing of assets at this time.
I'm hesitating to say this, but. even in the midst of war and so on, it does appear as if looking fine will not be affected because there's a beauty firm in Russia which is keeping its doors open. It's not leaving in spite of all the sanctions.
Yeah, well, they are saying they're doing it to protect their 700 staff who are in Russia. They don't want to leave them hanging. And they feel that if they just let them go, they might, face some harsh economic realities, which obviously is what has been happening there. But it's also important to know that what they are doing more is the online sales. So
so it's not really the physical.
Yes. So it's more of the online sales they're doing, and they have stopped shipment into Russia. So they're just doing maybe go online and then they can send it to you and all that. That's mostly what they are doing. But they say it's for their staff. There are 700 staff who are in Russia. I mean, it's not about looking good at this time. It's about keeping the employment.
Well, keeping them, which was why I said I was hesitating about saying that. But thank you, Ini. As usual, like every other day, there is much to discuss, especially on the business front. Business Morning follows this program, and then Business Incorporated will come up thereafter. Have yourself a good Friday and a good Easter weekend. Thank you very much, Ini. After the break, Russian man marries Ukrainian woman at Mexican border. We talk about the triumph of love. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Canada will deploy up to 150 military personnel to Poland to support Ukrainians fleeing Russia's war and address a growing refugee crisis, according to Anita Anand, the defense minister. Most of those military personnel will assist with the immediate care and processing of Ukrainian refugees at reception centers across Poland. More than half of the over 4.5 million people who have left since Russia's invasion have gone to neighboring Poland. The Canadian Armed Forces members would also support a Polish-led task force for humanitarian assistance and help resettle Ukrainians in Canada.
To help address the growing crisis at the border between Poland and Ukraine, I am announcing today the deployment of up to 150 Canadian Armed Forces personnel, with approximately 100 personnel in the immediate term who will assist Poland's efforts to support and care for Ukrainians fleeing violence. The majority will come from Edmonton and Kingston and through here in Trenton in the coming days. Now, over the next few months, our military will provide support across 3 lines of effort. First, we will be deploying armed forces members to reception centers across Poland to assist with the immediate care and processing of Ukrainian refugees. This is the largest component of our deployment to Poland. We will assist Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada by acting as a liaison with the Polish Defense Forces as IRCC works so that thousands more Ukrainians can continue to resettle in this country.
Minister of National Defense will make an announcement. Immediately following the announcement, there will be a brief question and answer period.
And Ukrainian and Polish volunteers say there are shortages of accommodation, work and supplies as they struggle to settle hundreds of refugees in the Polish port city of Gdansk. Some of the volunteers themselves come from areas heavily affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Gdansk Helps is a foundation set up by the city's City Hall. Volunteers point new arrivals and settle refugees to places where they can get housing, food and work or schools. All around the center, flyers and posters offer services ranging from free ferry tickets to Sweden to psychological help. Gdansk Helps Reception Center coordinator Agnieszka Kawat-Kazenska says finding housing for refugees remains a major problem. According to her, around 160 people arrive each day looking for accommodation or other assistance, but she adds that some days it could be significantly lower or higher. Ukraine's State Border Guard Service says it has reclaimed territory close to the country's border with Belarus. In a video uploaded on social media by the State Border Guard, men dressed in military uniform bearing the Ukrainian flag walk past a checkpoint with an open barrier saying they are approaching the border. Inside the checkpoint office, there's an open fridge with some of its contents and other items discarded on the floor. Everything is open and nothing, says one of the unidentified men. The men then reinstate the border posts and flutter the Ukrainian flag on a nearby flagpole. Video shows signs and border post colors that match those seen at the Ukraine-Belarus border. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Melia says that Russia was massing troops not only along the Russia-Ukraine border, but also in Belarus and Moldova's breakaway Transnistria region. Let's check some of the sports stories. UEFA has confirmed that Ukraine's delayed World Cup qualification playoff semi-final against Scotland has been rearranged for June the 1st, with the winners scheduled to face Wales 4 days later for a place at this year's tournament. The match was due to be played at Hampden Park in Glasgow on March the 24th, but was postponed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Wales, who beat Austria 2-1 in their semi-final, will host the playoff final at the Cardiff City Stadium on June the 5th. Russia were scheduled to take part in the playoffs, but have now been suspended from international soccer by UEFA and FIFA. Ukrainian climber Antonina Semolova says she will submit Mount Everest carrying her national flag to rally global support for her country and boost morale among those fighting the Russian invasion. Semolova will be the only climber from Ukraine attempting to summit a Himalayan peak this season, and the 33-year-old says her endeavor is the only way she knows how to draw attention to the suffering of her compatriots.
Because I'm not in Ukraine now and I can't help on the place, I think that would be a great support for Ukrainian people to know that even in the hardest year, 2022, somebody will be there on the top of the world, hopefully, and our Ukrainian flag will be flying on the top of the world. I climb Everest to support all the people of Ukraine, to support every warrior, every volunteer, and all the people who were affected by this cruel war, and to give them strength to fight till we win. And my father and my younger brother, they are in Ukraine now, fighting for our freedom, and I'm very, very proud of them. So I'm dreaming of coming back to Ukraine, to my native Kiev after Everest, and to hug all my family. Yeah.
And finally on the program, love broke all boundaries as a Russian man married a Ukrainian woman in Tijuana, the largest border city connecting Mexico with California, to seek asylum in the United States. More than 10,000 kilometers away from their home countries, Russian Semen Bobrovsky and Ukrainian Darina Senyuk got married at the civil registry offices in Tijuana City Hall. Before the Russian invasion, the couple lived in Ukraine and managed to leave the country and arrive in Tijuana a fortnight ago to apply for refugee status in the United States. The U.S. authorities only allowed Daria to enter the U.S. as a refugee, as the Russian community has not been allowed to enter the country since the war began. The only Russians allowed to enter the U.S. are those who can prove with a document that they have family there. Due to the restriction, the couple asked the Municipal Directorate of Migrant Services in Tijuana for support to get married.
Roma Hernández Núñez. También los de la prensa tienen que contestar. ¿Ninguno? No. Varias hojas, me va a firmar 5 hojas. El ramo.
Well, basically, we never thought about this, and we never thought about us getting married in another country, mostly because we were planning it, and we were planning it in Ukraine. But things happened like they happened. We never expected a war to come. No one expected that. And because of this, I mean, we're really lucky and we're really grateful to be here at this moment, to the people who are surrounding us right now. And this is basically it.
Well, those who say that love trumps all do know something or two about that. That's our package this morning, this Good Friday. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredoluale. There will be an update at 5 o'clock. But for now, do go out there and have yourselves a lovely Good Friday and a happy Easter weekend.